The sky over the west was bruised with the deep purple and fiery orange of dusk, the kind of evening that made the horizon look like it was bleeding. Two children, barely 10 and 8, ran barefoot across the dusty ground, their small hands clasped tightly together as they stumbled into the fading light. "Mama can't breathe," the older one cried, the words raw with desperation. "Her ribs, they're broken." Their voices carried over the empty plains. But there was no one to answer, no friendly face in sight, only the wind that cut like knives across their cheeks. The air smelled of smoke and iron, remnants of recent skirmishes between settlers and the people of their land. Their mother lay slumped against the wall of their small wooden cabin, the once white planks now stained with time and struggle, her chest rising and falling unevenly, each breath a harsh struggle that seemed to rip at her very soul. Tears blurred the children's vision as they crouched beside her, their tiny hands pressing against her body, trying and failing to ease her pain. From the horizon, a horse's hooves thumped in the distance, steady and strong, echoing like a heartbeat that had never known fear. The children squinted, and a tall figure emerged through the haze. A cowboy, dust-coated and silent, carrying a rifle slung across his shoulder, and a presence that demanded both respect and caution. He had wandered these lands for years, a loner who spoke to no one yet saw everything, a witness to the relentless encroachment of the West upon lands that were not his. When he saw the children, their anguish etched into the lines of their small faces, something inside him shifted. He slowed his horse to a stop, boots crunching against the dirt, eyes scanning the cabin and the shadows that clung to it. The cowboy dismounted, his movements deliberate, slow, but with an intensity that made the wind still around him. He knelt beside the children, assessing the mother's condition without asking, without hesitation, the way only someone who had stared death in the eye countless times could. "Stay with her," he said, voice low but firm, "and don't move her too much." His eyes darted toward the horizon, the direction where settlers and their lawless allies had begun pushing native families off the land. "They won't stop," he muttered to himself, though his jaws set with a stubborn defiance. He scanned the surroundings, noting the tracks, the discarded shells, the way the earth had been disturbed. There was a plan here, a danger he could feel crawling along the wind. But he wasn't about to let it reach them, not while he was still standing. The children clung to his arms as he checked for supplies, pulling a small canteen and torn blanket from his saddlebag, improvising a makeshift splint for their mother. Every movement carried urgency, but also a careful precision, like a dancer moving through a room full of knives. As night began to fall, the land seemed to grow darker, heavier, as if it too mourned the suffering of those who had called it home for generations. The children whispered their mother's name, and the cowboy spoke quietly to them, not to distract from the gravity of the moment, but to infuse a thread of hope where despair threatened to dominate. "I won't let them take this land," he said, his eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. "Not while I breathe, not while I'm standing." He was a man out of time, an anachronism in the merciless West, a protector when protection was almost forgotten. The children looked at him with wide eyes, hope stirring in their hearts like a fragile flame in the cold. Hours passed. The mother's breathing grew slightly more stable under the cowboy's care, though every exhale still drew a shudder from her frame. He fashioned a splint with the wooden boards from their cabin, wrapping it tightly but carefully around her chest, each movement measured to avoid causing further injury. "She's strong," he murmured, "stronger than they think." And for a brief moment, the children saw a flicker of belief, the kind that only comes when someone shows up in the darkest hour and refuses to turn away. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of coyotes, the echo of a world that was both wild and unforgiving. But the cowboy remained, a wall of defiance against the tide of cruelty. Then came the sounds that made his jaw tighten, a group of mounted men, voices raised in harsh laughter, the unmistakable clang of weapons being readied. The West had arrived, a force of greed and violence, ready to strip life from the defenseless. The cowboy stood slowly, each movement deliberate, the weight of his rifle grounding him like a promise. "If they want to take this land, they'll have to go through me," he said almost to himself. The children clutched his coat, eyes wide, but there was no panic, only trust. In the darkest hour, the world had delivered them a protector, and he would not falter. The first rider appeared over the ridge, silhouetted against the moon's silver glow. The cowboy tightened his grip on his weapon, heart steady, pulse syncing with the rhythm of the earth itself. He wasn't just standing for them. He was standing for every voice the West had tried to silence, every family they had tried to break. Lightning flashed in the distance, and the cowboy stepped forward, positioning himself between the approaching danger and the small cabin. "You've gone too far this time," he shouted to the men, voice carrying across the valley. "This ends tonight." The settlers laughed, a hollow, cruel sound, but he didn't flinch. There was something elemental in his stance, a raw force of justice that could not be measured in words alone. The wind carried the cries of the children, their mothers' strained breaths, the smell of dust and fire, and through it all, the cowboy held his ground. In that moment he became more than a man. He became a symbol, the embodiment of resistance against oppression, a reminder that courage still had a place in the West. And as the first shadow of confrontation stretched across the plain, the children whispered among themselves, hope blooming in their hearts for the first time since the world had turned against them. "He's going to fight for us," the younger one said, clutching his sister's hand. "He's going to fight for Mama." And the cowboy, standing against the tide, understood that this night would mark the beginning of a reckoning, a battle not just for survival, but for the soul of the land itself. The West had never faced anyone like him before. The night was alive with tension, every shadow a potential threat, every gust of wind carrying the echo of danger. The cowboy stood between the small cabin and the approaching riders, the weight of his rifle solid in his hands, his eyes scanning the horizon with the precision of a hawk. The children huddled close behind him, their mother weakly supported against the rough boards of the cabin, each shallow breath a reminder of what was at stake. From the darkness the mounted men approached like phantoms, their laughter and jeers breaking the heavy silence, confident that fear would bend him to their will. But the cowboy was no ordinary man. He carried the weight of the land itself in his stance, a silent promise that he would not let the injustice of the West take another life on his watch. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the riders in sharp, violent flashes. In that brief moment, the cowboy saw their faces, hardened and cruel, and the fire in their eyes made his resolve only stronger. He stepped forward, planting his boots firmly into the dust, and his voice cut across the night like steel. "Back away, or this ends badly for you." The words were more than a warning. They were a declaration, a line drawn in the sand where right met wrong. The settlers laughed again, a harsh, hollow sound that echoed over the plains, but he didn't flinch. He had seen what fear could do, and he had learned that courage was the weapon that could make a difference in a world that had forgotten justice. The first rider charged, whip cracking, eyes wild with greed and violence. The cowboy's hands moved with deliberate speed, firing a shot that threw the horse off balance without harming the rider. Unnecessarily a calculated move, designed to protect life while enforcing boundaries. The other riders hesitated for the first time, uncertainty flickering in their faces. The cowboy didn't give them time to recover. He advanced, every step a statement, every movement a testament to a man who refused to bow to oppression. Behind him, the children watched with wide eyes, awe and fear mingling in their hearts. This was a man who had become more than a protector. He had become a shield against the darkness, a force of unwavering principle in a world that had gone mad. Suddenly, the air was filled with the thunderous sounds of hooves and shouts. One of the settlers attempted to flank him, thinking the cowboy was just one man, alone, human, mortal. But he anticipated it. With a fluid motion, he disarmed the man, not killing, but neutralizing the threat with brutal efficiency. Every move he made was precise, deliberate, and guided by a moral code that few in this land still remembered. The children, trembling but safe for the moment, whispered prayers to the night sky, their hopes entwined with the cowboy's courage. He was the embodiment of a truth they had always believed, but had feared lost, that one person, an unwavering heart, could stand against the tide of injustice. The battle stretched across the dusty plain, shots ringing out, dust and smoke curling into the night sky. The cowboy moved with the inevitability of fate itself, never reckless, never cruel, but unstoppable in his pursuit of justice. One by one the settlers fell back, confusion and fear finally breaking, the arrogant certainty they had carried across the land. He did not celebrate, did not taunt. He simply stood vigilant, ensuring no further harm came to the mother and her children. Every breath he took carried the weight of the promise he had made, a promise that stretched beyond life and death, beyond the borders the West sought to impose. When the last of the riders fled into the darkness, the cowboy turned back to the small cabin. The children ran to him, tears streaking their dusty faces, relief flooding their features. "He's gone," the younger one whispered, clutching his mother's hand. The cowboy knelt beside her, checking the makeshift splint, reassuring them with quiet words, his presence a steady anchor in a world that had tried to sweep them away. Outside, the wind finally softened, carrying a sense of calm that felt like a gift, a small reprieve in a land that had known so little mercy. "Thank you," the older child said, voice breaking, eyes shining with gratitude. The cowboy nodded, saying nothing of his own pain, his own history, or the countless battles he had fought silently across the West. For now, his mission was simple: ensure they survived, and give them hope where hope had almost vanished. The mother, though still weak, managed a small smile, and in that moment, the cowboy understood that his stand had not only preserved life, but rekindled the fire of faith in a world that had nearly forgotten it. As dawn broke, painting the plains with light and gold, the cowboy mounted his horse once more. He looked back at the family, his eyes lingering on the mother and children, seeing in them a future that might yet grow strong, unbroken by the cruelty they had endured. "Stay strong," he said quietly, more to the land itself than to anyone else. Then, with the wind in his face and the rising sun casting long shadows across the plains, he rode away, a lone figure standing against a West that had tried to crush hope, a living testament to courage and justice. And somewhere on the horizon the children waved, their hearts full of the knowledge that heroes did exist, that courage could still change the course of a night, a life, a world. "Subscribe," the older one whispered, as if speaking to everyone who had heard their story, so no one forgets what he did for us, and for everyone who needs someone to stand against the West. In that moment, the cowboy became legend, not for fame, not for glory, but for the simple truth that in the darkest places, someone has to stand. And when they do, hope can breathe again.